Good morning and welcome to the Liverpool Daily News. I'm your host, David Comerford, and I'm joined by David Lynch to discuss Liverpool's victory in the Merseyside derby. And if we start, David, with the man of the match from last night in Stefan Bajcetic, how big a moment is that in a young player's career to deliver a man of the match performance at Anfield in a Merseyside derby and have the added bonus, I guess, of it being when the team is desperate for a victory, something to kickstart their season?
Yeah, well, I think it said a lot for starters that Jurgen Klopp even kept him in the lineup really, because obviously he made some changes to that midfield. He'd lost Thiago, so that was a real blow to injury. But to bring in sort of the old guard back in Fabinho and Henderson was a big call, and it would have been easy maybe to just leave Naby Keita in on that left hand side of that midfield and go with a more senior option. But he said in his pre-match interview, didn't he? He said, what would the performances have been like if we hadn't had Stefan in? Despite the poor results, he was brilliant in there, and so he's absolutely right. He fully deserved to be in the starting 11, and then from there just absolutely proved why. He was just phenomenal, really. He's so composed, isn't he, for a teenager? His ability to sort of sniff out danger, but then also some just beautiful passes that he played, real composure, or just a drop of the shoulder to, he did that Thiago thing, actually, the little trick where he drops the shoulder and leaves someone for dead and runs away with the ball. And I just thought, he looked like basically sort of a light for light replacement for Thiago at times, which is probably the biggest compliment you can pay him. And just a phenomenal performance. And as you say, significant to do it in a derby at a full Anfield in front of a sort of an expectant crowd, and a really difficult sort of scenario for a youngster to come into. But he's been like that since he's come into the team. He's just a mega talent, and Mo Salah said himself, didn't he, that probably been Liverpool's best player since he came into the team. And it's just incredibly exciting because he's so young and he's still got some developing to do, but he's already a really high quality footballer.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a few people in the chat praising him as well. Jim says he loves a tackle. Kazi says his passing was great. And Toby Larone, I don't think that's his real name, but what he said, he was beyond impressed and how much money has he saved us, which is a great point, really. I mean, Bajcetic coming into the team, obviously wasn't playing number 6 last night, but do you look at it now and you think, if you're Liverpool, you know what, we probably have just saved ourselves 40-50 million on a midfield signing now, because we've got someone who is ready to take the next step. I mean, maybe the timeline was next season, but the way it's going, it's hard to see him falling out of the team before the end of the current campaign.
I think that was one of the big benefits of last night, is to see that he doesn't have to just play in the 6 as well, actually, because I think that really, really does make him an option for next season. Because, if he was just a 6 and you think, if Fabinho's problems continued into next season and it just wasn't working out for him, would you really want to trust an 18-year-old in the 6th position for a whole season? It'd be putting a lot of expectation on his shoulders. Whereas if he can be a rotational option in that position, it just gives you more options and gives him more options in terms of getting into the team. And I think, if he can continue this form until the end of the season, then he definitely puts himself in the mix as a full-on first team option for next season. And that it does possibly save Liverpool some money, because you're looking at it and you think, okay, we'd love to sign Bellingham, still number 1 target. What a great signing he would be. But if you can limit what else you need to spend on the midfield, it would really sort of, it would make things easier in terms of if you need to do anything elsewhere. I'm thinking maybe at centre half there could be a discussion to be had about something to be done there. And I look at Bellingham is obviously the number 1 option, and Liverpool do like Mateus Nunes. But you looked at what Bajcetic did last night, and you think very similar to what sort of we've seen we've seen of Nunes in terms of his skill set, in terms of bringing the ball forward even and that gliding through the pitch and sort of being someone who could cover that left hand side where Thiago is. If you think that do Bajcetic and Thiago sort of battle for that position next season, and Bajcetic occasionally fills in at the number 6, do you then go for a totally different profile? It's something for the recruitment staff to think about, and just shows how good he's been when he's come in, that he's probably making some decisions around what the recruitment looks like more difficult for the recruitment staff.
I think it's really interesting what you say about Thiago earlier, when you mentioned how Bajcetic did almost the same move. It's like, we talk a lot about how players can learn from more experienced stars on the training ground, really. And sometimes you don't really see tangible evidence of that, but if you kind of maybe see little moments, little effective tricks that are being used, it's like, there we go. There is that process in action. I mean, one last thing on Bajcetic before we move on to a couple of other players. I mean, it's difficult because on one level you want to keep a lid on expectations. We talk all the time about don't put too much pressure on a young player and things like that. Don't give them too much responsibility too early. But I mean, are we looking at sort of the best talent to emerge from Liverpool's academy since Trent Alexander-Arnold here?
It's, well, as you say, probably we don't want to put too much pressure on him, and it is very early days, and you've got to be careful. But certainly on the early evidence suggests as much. I mean, there's a long way to go in this season, and it's kind of good actually that he's going to clearly have the opportunities to play a lot more between now and the end of the season. He's earned that, and whatever happens, it's going to be a learning process for him. So I'm sure we're going to see some difficult games for him, some poor games in there possibly, but. That first few games he's been into the team, I think you could say, that it's the most clear instant impact we've seen of someone who is clearly first team ready at an incredibly young age since Trent. And wow, if he goes on to have that sort of sustained similar impact into his 20s, then Liverpool are very, very fortunate to have found another.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comparison as well because you look at that sort of team that Trent came into, and granted it wasn't a Liverpool team that was right at the top of the game, but it was still a lot more maybe functional, and the atmosphere around the team was a lot better this year. It's been up there with like the most sort of difficult circumstances to come into, really. So Bajcetic to impress, I think is even more creditable. To be fair, but another player who shone last night was Cody Gakpo, scoring his first goal for the club. Do you think it was sort of the best, or sort of the last opportunity seized for him? Maybe was it a case, do you think, if he hadn't maybe made the impact last night in terms of the goal or the assist, or just had struggled a little bit, that he might have actually lost his place to Firmino and Jota, who've obviously seen come back into the team now?
Yeah, you do wonder whether those two being back in the squad is sort of giving him a little bit of a kick up the backside and a realization that if you've got to pull it out now, and that's how it works in squads, isn't it? That's what you want, really, is you want that pressure on people, and that tends to help people deliver. We've seen that when Liverpool's squad is at its strongest, that's when they've been playing the best football, and I think that competition for places always helps. And what was great about last night from him, I just thought. It wasn't just the goal, was it? I think, that obviously gave him a confidence lift, and he did look about 10 feet taller after that. But it was just his general all-round play was just so impressive. I mean, Jamie Carragher had said early in the week, hadn't he? He looked at Gakpo and couldn't really understand why Liverpool would sign him. He didn't seem like a Liverpool signing under Jurgen Klopp. But then, I think if he was in the stands last night, wasn't he, watching the game, he would have seen exactly what Gakpo can bring, which is, not just that goal threat from wide areas, which we know he's definitely got, but it's that flexibility in terms of being able to. He was shrugging off defenders, wasn't he? He was taking the ball in uncomfortable, tight areas, coming away, and then picking a pass really smartly. So I think there's obvious evidence now that he's going to be massively useful. And to be fair, even in games where he wasn't scoring previously, I think we'd seen a little bit of that. I think people have been a little bit harsh on Gakpo. It's hardly been disastrous. He's been quieting in some games and a bit in and out, but the team as a whole has been terrible at times. So I think we saw when he's in a fully intense and a good Liverpool performance like we saw last night, it will be hugely useful going forward. And to get the goals huge, just because it'll give him that confidence lift to show that on a more regular basis now. And that's kind of exciting, really, because you're seeing, as well as Bajcetic, who we touched on, obviously. We're seeing like the glimpses now, really, of Jurgen Klopp's next great Liverpool team, hopefully, and hopefully this is just the start of an upward trend that will continue into next season.
I think what's interesting with Gakpo is you've got this player who was putting up crazy numbers at PSV. I think he was on sort of 13 goals, 17 assists, all competitions before he joined. But you're not seeing him used in the same way. You've not sort of said to him, almost like you did to Luis Diaz last season, when it was like, you know what, you just play on that left side. We won't overload you with information. We'll just let you do what you're good at. We haven't just put Gakpo in on the left side of our attack and just sort of let him play in the same style that he's been used to. We've changed his position, and we've not even just used him as a standard number 9. We tried to use him as a false 9 as well. So I think if you combine that kind of learning curve with what's been going on generally, there is, like you say, an awful lot of mitigation there. But one last question before we sign off for this morning. There's been a lot of talk about last night as a possible turning point. I mean, how cautious are you before you start talking about the game in those terms? Because it feels like there have been a lot of times this season where Liverpool have produced, a pretty good performance, won a fairly big game, and then regressed. Is there something to suggest that last night might be different?
Yeah, you're right to say there's been quite a few turning points this season that have sort of that turned into false dawns, I suppose, and so you've got to be wary really about predicting anything going forward. But the one thing I would say about last night is that there were so many multiple positives, but the main one really was that the performance was really, really good. It wasn't just a sort of lucky win that Liverpool came out with. They absolutely dominated Everton from start to finish. Yes, they did get that little bit of good fortune with Tarkowski hitting the post, but then, I just thought across the 90 minutes was so convincing. And also the fact that they rediscovered that intensity in the play, which has been so sorely missed throughout this season. They just looked back to the good old selves, really. And I think that gives you hope that performances going forward will continue to improve, and hopefully Liverpool can get in a bit of a run. And another factor as well, actually, which is definitely worth mentioning, is look at the bench last night. So much strength and depth there, which is again something Liverpool have missed. Players are now starting to come back to fitness, and if they can keep a solid squad of players fit between now and the end of the season, I've said it so many times, I think on these morning calls, that you only need to win 5 on the bounce, and all of a sudden you are right back in that top 4 race. That is the pace to get Liverpool back in it. And in previous seasons that wouldn't have been much really to Liverpool to win 5 on the bounce. This season it looks like a big challenge, but if yesterday could be the start of a 5-game winning run, then I would bet that Liverpool will be in, if not in the top 4 after that, then within 2 or 3 points. And then there's a lot of the season to go there to hold off the challengers who are inconsistent themselves. So yeah, hopefully it can be a turning point, but obviously a big challenge coming up at the weekend in Newcastle away.
Yeah, we've seen some of the teams fed up the table dropping quite a few points recently as well. Hopefully that kind of continues and we'll have maybe missed opportunity on that front, but certainly the injury returns I think could be huge. But yeah, like I say, that will about wrap us up for this morning. Thanks very much, David. Remember to look at all the written content that goes up on liverpool.com today. We'll have all the analysis from the Merseyside derby. And then as the week goes on, we'll obviously start looking ahead to the game against Newcastle too. But yeah, we'll be back at the same time tomorrow for another stream, and we'll see you then.